The email arrived at 2:17 a.m. Arthur Vance, founder of Sterling Vance Holdings, never slept before 3. The markets in Asia were his chessboard. But this email wasn't about a hostile takeover. The subject line was blank. The sender, anonymous. Inside was only a link and a single sentence. Thought you should know what your daughter is really working on late at night. His jaw tightened. He clicked. A garish pink website loaded. The profile name was Lexi, but the face was his daughter, Annalise. Her bio listed her availability and expectations. A cold, precise rage, the kind he reserved for gutting a rival company, began to crystallize in his veins. He had built an empire to protect her. He snapped the laptop shut. The soft click echoed like a gunshot in the cavernous penthouse overlooking Central Park. Annalise, his brilliant 24-year-old daughter, a Wharton graduate, he'd just made a junior analyst at his firm. The sole heir. He had taught her about leverage, about risk, about the brutal calculus of power. In his world, you were either an asset or a liability. There was no in-between. He had built this fortress of glass and steel, this empire of calculated acquisitions, to protect her. And she had just handed the enemy the keys. This wasn't just the betrayal of a father. It was a catastrophic security breach, a vulnerability he hadn't foreseen. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, the city lights sprawling beneath him like a circuit board he owned. Anger was an indulgence, a messy emotion for lesser men. Arthur Vance dealt in consequences. He pulled out his phone, his thumb scrolling past her name without hesitation. He dialed his head of security, a man who moved through the world like a ghost. "Marcus," Arthur's voice was ice, "I have a new due diligence project. Priority 1. The subject is named Lexi. I'm sending you a link. I want to know everything. Every transaction, every client, every communication. Everything." He didn't move from the window. The call was done. The mechanism of his world was now turning, its gears grinding towards this new, unforeseen problem. He saw her face not as it was on the website, smiling and predatory, but as it was at 10 years old, across a chessboard in this very room. He had just taught her the Sicilian defense. "Every piece has a value, Annalise," he'd told her, his voice low and serious. "But no piece is indispensable. You must be willing to sacrifice anything to win." She had nodded, her eyes wide with a gravity that didn't belong to a child, and proceeded to sacrifice her knight to trap his queen. He had felt a surge of pride so fierce it was almost painful. He wasn't raising a daughter. He was forging a successor. Her mother, Eleanor, had hated it. "You're turning her into a shark, Arthur," she'd once whispered, her voice trembling, after he'd made Annalise sit in on a hostile board meeting at 16. "She needs to be a person, not a weapon." Eleanor had called his empire a gilded cage. She left 2 years later, trading $500 million for a quiet life in Napa, writing poetry. He'd shown the settlement to Annalise. "This is the price of sentiment," he had explained. "Weakness is expensive." He believed she had understood the lesson. He'd paid for the best of everything. The tutors, the trainers, the Wharton education. Every step was a calculated investment in the Vance legacy. When she graduated summa cum laude, he hadn't hugged her. He'd handed her an analyst's keycard to the 57th floor. "Welcome to the real world," he'd said, and he meant it as the highest form of affection he could offer. Her recent claims of working late on the IPO prospectus had pleased him. He saw his own drive, his own refusal to sleep until the kill was certain. He thought she was finally becoming him. He turned from the window, the city lights now seeming garish, mocking. The rage he'd felt earlier had cooled, replaced by the chilling clarity of a balance sheet. This wasn't a youthful rebellion. This wasn't about money. He'd given her a trust fund that could cripple a small nation. This was a strategic move. She was leveraging her own value, the value had created, on an open market outside his control. She had taken his lifelong lesson about sacrifice and applied it to the one asset he'd never considered disposable, herself. She wasn't just defying him, She was liquidating his legacy, one transaction at a time. A soft chime emanated from the phone on his marble desk. A single, encrypted message from Marcus. Kumcheo's package delivered. Arthur walked to the desk, his reflection a dark specter in the polished black surface. The memories were done. Now he would have the data. He touched the trackpad, and the file bloomed open on his screen. It was not a simple report. It was a digital vivisection. Marcus's work was always flawless, a testament to surgical precision and infinite resources. The screen was split into 4 quadrants. The first held surveillance photos. Annalise, his Annalise, stepping out of town cars, entering discreet hotels in the meatpacking district, laughing with men whose faces were blurred into anonymity, save for one. Arthur's breath caught in his throat. Julian Croft, his most persistent and predatory rival. The second quadrant displayed financial architecture, a labyrinth of offshore accounts, cryptocurrency wallets, and untraceable transfers. The numbers weren't staggering for his world, but the pattern was. Small, frequent payments from shell corporations he knew, with chilling certainty, led back to Croft Capital. This wasn't about a lifestyle. This was payment for services rendered. The third, and most damning, quadrant contained data. Encrypted chat logs, cracked wide open. He scrolled, his face an unreadable mask of granite. The conversation started as expected, flirtatious, transactional. But as he read the logs with Croft, the text shifted. Croft, the preliminary numbers on the Kenner Tech IPO, your father is being aggressive. Lexi, he calls it confidence. He thinks their server-side security is ironclad. He's wrong. There's a back door in their beta platform. He doesn't know I found it during due diligence. Arthur felt the air leave his lungs. It was a detail so minor, so deep in the weeds of the prospectus, that only someone on the inside, someone he trusted, could have known it. She wasn't just selling her time. She was selling his secrets. The late nights she claimed to be spending at the office, poring over the deal. She was, but not for him. She was mining his empire for vulnerabilities, packaging them and selling them to the one man who could use them to gut him. His lessons. She had taken all his lessons. Leverage. Risk. Sacrifice. She was sacrificing him to build her own power base with his enemy. The pride he'd felt watching her trap his queen on the chessboard all those years ago curdled into something black and corrosive. He hadn't forged a successor. He had armed a traitor. The final quadrant of the screen held a single, live GPS tracker, a pulsing red dot. Location: Annalise's apartment in Tribeca. A digital leash. He leaned back, the leather of his chair groaning in the silence. The betrayal wasn't emotional anymore. It was tactical. She had made a critical error. She had mistaken his love for a weakness, a blind spot. But he had no blind spots. He had only assets and liabilities. With a terrifying, serene clarity, he reclassified his daughter. He picked up his phone, scrolling past Marcus's name to a contact he hadn't used in years. A single initial, S. He pressed the call button. It rang once. Yes? The voice on the other end was quiet, toneless. Sterling, Arthur said, his own voice a flat, cold line. We have a problem with the Kenner Tech IPO, a leak. There was a pause. Internal? The very center of the circle, Arthur confirmed, his eyes fixed on Julian Croft's face on the screen. I need you to prepare a counter-offering. Something that will put Croft Capital in a very, very deep hole. Use the information he thinks he has. We're going to let him walk right into the kill box. And the source of the leak? Sterling asked. Arthur looked at the pulsing red dot of the GPS. His daughter. His liability. Leave the source to me, he said, and hung up. He had taught her that no piece is indispensable. It was time for her final lesson. He closed the file. The judgment was rendered. The data was no longer a wound. It was a weapon. He walked to the bar and poured a single glass of Macallan 25. Not for comfort, but for ritual. An action to mark a turning point. He considered the chessboard. A direct assault on Annalise. Firing her, cutting her off, was a brute solution, an admission of defeat. It created messy emotional debris. Arthur Vance preferred the slow, inexorable squeeze. He didn't just defeat his opponents, he dismantled them, leaving them with nothing but the clear, cold understanding of exactly how they had lost. His lesson for Annalisa would not be about money. She didn't respect money. She saw it as a tool, just as he did. The lesson had to be about something she valued more: reputation. Legacy. The one thing he hadn't given her, the one thing she had inherited from her mother's side of the family. He thought of Eleanor's father, General William Harding, retired. A man whose entire existence was a monument to honor and discipline. A man who saw the world in black and white, right and wrong. To the general, betrayal wasn't a strategy, it was a cancer. And Annalise was his only grandchild, his pride. Arthur returned to his desk, the glass of scotch untouched. He opened a secure messaging app. A new directive for Marcus. Compile a summary dossier, profile link, a sample of the Croft communications, and the direct payment transfers. No surveillance photos, no analysis, just the cold hard facts. Encrypt it with Protocol Harding. Protocol Harding. A key they hadn't used since Eleanor had left, designed for matters of the family that required military-grade discretion. A minute later, the file appeared on his private server. Arthur opened a new email. The recipient's address was institutional, severe. 2. W. Harding at secure.mil. Subject: a difficult family matter. He typed the body of the message with the precision of a surgeon making an incision. By Libyan. Unfortunate situation has developed regarding your granddaughter. I believe the attached file is self-explanatory. I am deeply sorry to be the one to share this with you. Now regards. 2. This Bax Dern Pisser. He attached the encrypted dossier. His finger hovered over the send button for a single deliberate second. This was not an act of anger. It was an act of severance. He was cauterizing a wound, excising the part of his legacy that had turned malignant. He clicked send. The faint chime of the outgoing mail was the only sound in the room. He had just launched a precision strike not at his daughter's finances, but at her very foundation. The trap for Croft was business. This was a lesson in consequences. He finally picked up the scotch, the amber liquid catching the cold city lights. The day broke over Manhattan, gray and indifferent. Arthur Vance was at his desk by 5 a.m., the city still cloaked in shadow. The untouched glass of scotch from the night before sat on a coaster, a silent testament to the decision made. His screen wasn't filled with his daughter's betrayal, but with the intricate architecture of the Kenner Tech IPO. Sterling entered without knocking, a ghost in a Savile Row suit, placing a tablet on the desk. On the screen was a single line of code, highlighted in red. "The back door," Sterling said, his voice a low hum. "We've modified it. It no longer leads to their data core, it leads to a honeypot, a digital phantom of their entire server infrastructure. Every byte Croft pulls will be worthless, fabricated data." Arthur nodded, his eyes not leaving the screen. "And the trigger? The moment his algorithm attempts to exploit the back door to short the stock, it will trigger a mirror trade on our end, using the very capital he's leveraging. He won't just be betting against a ghost, he'll be funding his own annihilation." Sterling allowed himself the barest hint of a smile. "It's elegant, Arthur." "It's business," Arthur corrected, his voice flat. The trap was set. Now he just had to wait for the quarry to step into it. Annalise walked in at 9, looking radiant. She wore a tailored blazer, her hair pulled back in a severe, professional style that mirrored his own. She was the image of a successor. She placed a coffee on his desk. "Morning, Dad. I was up until 3 finalizing the risk assessment for Kenner. I think we're solid." The lie was so seamless, so perfectly delivered it was almost admirable. Arthur met her gaze, his own expression a placid mask. "Good work. Your dedication is noted." He gestured to a chair. "Sit. I have a new assignment for you." She sat, crossing her legs, a flicker of triumphant pride in her eyes. She thought her late nights were paying off. "I'm ready. Julian Croft is going to make a move on Kenner Tech," Arthur said, watching her face for any reaction. There was none. She was good. He's going to attempt a hostile short sell on launch day. He believes he has an edge. He slid a file across the desk. It was thin. This contains the login credentials for a secondary dark pool trading account. I want you to monitor Croft's activity in real time. The moment he makes his move, you will execute a counter-buy. You'll be our frontline defense. Her eyes widened slightly. This was a massive responsibility, a direct role in a fight against his chief rival. It was a test, a promotion, a sign of ultimate trust. She was being invited into the inner sanctum. "I won't let you down," she said, her voice steady, betraying nothing of the fact that she was being asked to counter the very attack she had enabled. "I know you won't," Arthur said, the words hanging in the air like poison. He was handing her the weapon that would fire on her own accomplice, forcing her to participate in his revenge. The IPO launched at 9:30 a.m. For 2 hours, the market was calm. Then, at 11:47, a cascade of alerts lit up the trading floor. Sterling appeared in Arthur's doorway. "He's in. Croft is leveraging $1.5 billion against Kenner." Arthur didn't look at Sterling. His eyes were on the glass wall of his office, through which he could see Annalise, her face a mask of concentration, staring at her own screen. He watched her finger hover over her mouse, her brow furrowed. She was watching the numbers plummet, seeing the attack she orchestrated unfold, while holding the very tool to stop it. He watched as her jaw set, and she clicked. She was defending the family empire against an attack she had sold to the enemy. The irony was exquisite. Sterling's phone buzzed. He glanced at it. "It's done. The mirror trade was successful. Croft's position is hemorrhaging. By market close, he'll be facing a margin call he can't possibly meet. Croft Capital will be insolvent by morning." Arthur simply nodded. The first part of his plan was complete. The business threat was neutralized, annihilated. Now for the personal. As if on cue, his private line rang. The caller ID was a single word: Harding. He waved Sterling out of the office and accepted the call, putting it on speaker. The silence stretched for 3 full seconds before the voice came, devoid of warmth, stripped down to pure command. "Arthur." "William," Arthur replied, his tone equally measured. "I received your file. I have reviewed the contents." Another pause, this one heavier, colder. "I am on a plane. I land at Teterboro at 1900 hours. I will deal with my granddaughter myself." There was no anger in his voice, no shock. Just the chilling finality of a military verdict being handed down. "That won't be necessary, William," Arthur said, almost gently. "It is absolutely necessary," the general countered, a sliver of steel entering his tone. "This is not a corporate matter. This is a matter of honor. The girl has no honor." "I agree," Arthur said, "which is why I have already handled it. I suggest you check your email. I sent you a second file 10 minutes ago." Arthur looked through the glass at his daughter. Annalise was now standing, a confused, dawning horror on her face as she looked at her screen, likely seeing news alerts about the catastrophic failure of Croft's trade. Her phone was buzzing in her hand, ignored. On the other end of the line, Arthur heard the soft click of a mouse. He imagined the general, sitting in the Spartan luxury of a private jet, opening the file. It contained a single document: Annalise's irrevocable letter of resignation from Sterling Vance Holdings, and a one-way ticket to a postings branch of the company he'd set up for tax purposes years ago. A single office in Bern, Switzerland with a staff of 1. Her. An exile. "This is insufficient," the general stated. "Read the addendum," Arthur said calmly. Another moment of silence. "You've invoked the Harding Clause." The general's voice was different now. Not angry, not satisfied. It was impressed. The Harding Clause was a brutal stipulation Eleanor's father had insisted upon in their prenuptial agreement. In the event of a gross moral failing that brought shame upon the Harding name, Annalise's entire trust, the vast fortune inherited from her mother's side, would be ceded to a military charity of his choosing. A complete and total disinheritance, not by the father she betrayed, but by the grandfather whose honor she had just incinerated. On the other end of the line, the general's voice was like stone grinding on stone. "The funds are to be wired to the Wounded Warrior Project. Immediately." It was not a request. It was a command. You have handled this with appropriate severity, Arthur. The family name is cleansed. Do not contact me again regarding this matter." The line went dead. No goodbye. Just a final verdict delivered from 30,000 feet. Arthur didn't move. He simply placed the phone back in its cradle. The silence that followed was absolute, a perfect vacuum. Then, the door to his office clicked open. Annalise stood in the doorway, her professional mask shattered. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a terror that was rapidly eclipsing her confusion. She held her phone in a white-knuckled grip, the screen lit with a frantic cascade of notifications. "Croft," she whispered, the name tasting like ash in her mouth. His entire fund. It was liquidated. A margin call. He's ruined. She took a hesitant step into the room. "He's calling me, over and over. He's saying he was set up. That the data was a trap. He said, you knew." Her gaze locked on his, searching for denial, for anger, for anything other than the placid, glacial calm that met her. Arthur gestured to the chair opposite his desk, the same one she had sat in that morning, radiating triumphant deceit. "Sit down, Annalise." His voice was unnervingly patient. "The lesson isn't over." She didn't sit. She remained standing, a defendant before the judge. "You knew I was talking to him. It wasn't a question." The horrifying truth was dawning on her. "This morning, making me execute the trade, you made me do it. You made me destroy him. He was a threat to this company," Arthur stated simply. "And you were the weapon he tried to use against me. I simply re-aimed you." He steepled his fingers, his gaze clinical, as if examining a flawed projection on a spreadsheet. "Your first mistake was believing this was about money. Your trust fund made you wealthy, but it didn't make you strategic. Your second, more critical error was in your risk assessment. You leveraged an asset against its sole proprietor. You shorted your own stock. It was a foolish, emotional trade, Annalise." He slid a thin leather folio across the polished desk. It stopped perfectly before her. "What is this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Formalities." She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Her letter of resignation from Sterling Vance Holdings, effective immediately, with her signature flawlessly forged at the bottom. Tucked behind it was a one-way first-class ticket to Bern, Switzerland, for a flight that departed in 6 hours. "There's a small satellite office there," Arthur explained, his tone conversational. "A brass plate on a door for tax purposes. You are its new and only employee. A quiet place for you to contemplate the value of loyalty." Her breath hitched. A choked, desperate sound. "You're firing me? You're exiling me?" She shook her head, a flicker of her old defiance returning. "I don't care. I have my trust. My mother's money. I don't need you." "Ah," Arthur said softly. "The final item on the balance sheet." He swiveled his monitor towards her. Displayed on the screen was a bank statement for the Harding Family Trust. At the top was Annalise's name. At the bottom, under account balance, was a single, stark number, $0. Annalise stared, her mind refusing to process the figure. "No, that's impossible. You can't touch that. It's ironclad." "I can't," Arthur agreed. "But your grandfather can. It's called the Harding Clause, a provision for gross moral failure. He was disappointed in your extracurricular activities." The last of her composure crumbled. The defiance vanished, replaced by a raw, primal panic. This went beyond business, beyond betrayal. This was annihilation. He hadn't just outplayed her, he had erased her. "Why?" she finally gasped, the word hollow. "I did what you taught me. I used every advantage. I was becoming you." Arthur rose from his chair for the first time, walking to the window and looking down at the city he commanded. "No," he said, his back to her. "You tried to become my rival. A fatal miscalculation. You see, a rival I can respect. A rival I can destroy in the marketplace. But a traitor in my own house? A traitor is a liability to be liquidated. He turned to face her, his eyes holding no anger, no pain, only the cold, empty finality of a closed ledger. Years ago, on this floor, I taught you that no peace is indispensable. You sacrificed your knight to trap my queen, and I was proud. But you forgot the most important part of the lesson. He paused, letting the weight of his final words crush her. "What was it?" she whispered, her voice cracking, a final, desperate plea for understanding. "What lesson did I forget?" Arthur walked slowly back to his desk, his movements deliberate, final. He didn't sit, he stood over her, a monolith of judgment. "You learned how to sacrifice a piece to win an advantage," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying the weight of a death sentence. "But you never understood why. You don't sacrifice your pieces to weaken your own position. You sacrifice them to protect the king. The king isn't just another piece on the board, Annalise. The king soats the board. The king is the game itself." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the polished desk, the cold fury in his eyes, the last thing she would ever see up close. "You weren't a knight. You weren't a queen. You were the heir. And you put the king in check. For what? For Julian Croft? A scavenger. You took the name I gave you, the reputation I built, the legacy that was your birthright, and you put it on a public auction block like common chattel. It wasn't just treason. It was a tactical blunder of catastrophic proportions. You sold the keys to the empire for a pittance because you thought it made you powerful. It only made you cheap." He straightened up, the moment of intensity passing, replaced by an indifferent calm. He glanced at his watch. "Your flight leaves soon. The car is waiting downstairs." She stared at him, her face a ruin of comprehension. There were no more tears, no more arguments. There was nothing left to say. She had played the game and been swept from the board. Without another word, she turned and walked out of his office, out of his company, out of his life. The door clicked shut behind her, the sound as soft and final as the closing of a tomb. Arthur walked to the bar, picked up the glass of Macallan he had poured the night before, and returned to the window. He looked down at the city. His city. He raised the glass, not in celebration, but in confirmation. The liability had been cleared from the ledger. The balance sheet was clean. He took a slow, deliberate sip. The scotch burned, but his world was, once again, perfectly cold. What do you think is the bigger betrayal here, her being on that site in the first place, or him sending the proof to her father?